Today, the total amount of global debt has surpassed twice the size of the entire global economy. Governments, corporations, households, we are all in debt. The US debt has exceeded $35 trillion. European nations are shaken by austerity measures, and developing countries remain shackled to the IMF. But the story of debt is not just a modern issue. Throughout history, debt has been both an economic and a political tool. Empires rose on debt and fell by it. Kings ruled their people through debt. In fact, the chains of those who lost their freedom were often forged not of iron, but of promissory notes. In this episode, we will trace the path of debt, from debt slavery in ancient Rome to the feudal order of the Middle Ages, from the Ottoman Public Debt Administration to today's IMF policies. And we will see that debt is a weapon older and more powerful than money itself. The Roman Empire left its mark on history, not just with its armies, but with its legal system. The issue of debt was at the center of Roman law. Roman society, especially during the Republic, was built on farmers and small landowners. However, due to wars, famines, and poor harvests, many citizens fell into a debt trap. In Rome, a citizen who could not pay their debt could lose their freedom. In a practice called Nexum, the debtor was forced to work like a slave for the creditor. Debt directly determined one's social status. If a Roman citizen failed to pay, he would lose his home and fields. He and his family would enter the creditor's service. Even his children were seen as collateral for the debt's continuation. This situation caused great unrest. The descent of free citizens into slavery shook the foundational values of the Republic. In the 5th century BC, the people of Rome rebelled repeatedly against debt slavery. Historians call these revolts secessio plebis, or the withdrawal of the commoners. The people would leave the city en masse, pressuring the aristocratic senators. As a result, legal protections were introduced. Nexum was slowly limited and eventually abolished, but debt relations didn't disappear. They simply moved into a more legal framework. In Rome, debt was not just economic, it was political. Aristocratic senators controlled the lower classes by lending money. Debt was used to buy votes and ensure military loyalty. Today, sovereign debt plays a similar role in how financial markets and great powers steer politics. Roman debt slavery was, in fact, an early version of a structure that still exists today. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, political unity in Europe fragmented. In its place rose the feudal order, a hierarchy of lords, knights, and serfs. At the foundation of this system was still a debt relationship, but this time, not with Nexum chains, but through dependence on the land. A peasant, or serf, worked the lord's land and paid a large portion of his produce as tax in exchange for protection. But in reality, this was a form of debt. The peasant could not leave the land, because the security and shelter provided by the Lord was his life debt. Another major actor of the Middle Ages was the Church. The Catholic Church banned lending money at interest usury for a long time. But this ban did not mean the end of debt. While the Church prohibited it, Jewish bankers stepped in. Because they were not subject to the ban on interest, they lent money and financed trade. This made Jewish communities indispensable in Europe, but also targets of great hatred and pogroms. Debt had turned into a religious issue. The debates over whether interest is a sin were actually debates about who held economic power. From the 11th century onwards, the Crusades began. Thousands of knights set off for a religious duty, but these campaigns had an economic cost. Knights and lords took on massive debts to join the expedition. Many nobles could not pay their debts upon their return. This led to lands changing hands and new power balances emerging. The Crusades were not just religious, they were a way for the debt economy to reshape Europe. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, cities began to grow. Merchants and artisans formed a new class. The foundation of this class was also debt. A merchant provided capital by borrowing from bankers. Ships used in maritime trade were financed through partnerships and debt notes. In Italy, Florentine and Venetian bankers turned into Europe's financial centers. In this era, debt chained not only the peasant, but also the noble and the merchant. Debt had evolved from an individual problem into a societal structure. The Nexum chains of Rome were now invisible. The serf was tied to the land because he was indebted to his lord. The knight could lose his lands because he was indebted to his banker. The merchant could trade only because he was dependent on credit. Debt established a class hierarchy throughout the Middle Ages, and this structure persists even today. Modern man is bound not by chains, but by credit card statements. The Ottoman Empire was one of the world's most powerful states in the 16th century, but over time, wars, territorial losses, and declining revenues disrupted the fiscal balance. By the 19th century, the cost of wars increased. While European states grew rich through the Industrial Revolution, the Ottomans relied on agriculture. The tax system was insufficient and budget deficits grew. Initially, they tried to cover this with internal borrowing, called isham, but it wasn't enough. In 1854, during the Crimean War, the Ottomans took their first foreign loan. This debt was sourced from British and French bankers. Initially used for war financing, it was soon used to cover daily expenses. Between 1854 and 1874, the Ottomans borrowed approximately 15 billion francs. However, much of this money was wasted or lost to corruption. New railway projects, palace expenses, military spending, debts rose rapidly. In 1875, the Ottoman Empire declared it could not pay its foreign debts. This was a sovereign default in the modern sense. It was a massive shock to European financial circles. In 1881, with the Decree of Muharrem, the Public Debt Administration Diyunu Umumiye was established. This institution began to directly control the empire's most important revenue sources. Revenues from tobacco, salt, stamp duty, silk, and fisheries were transferred to this administration. It was staffed by representatives of creditor nations: Britain, France, Germany, Austria. The Ottomans could no longer manage their own revenues. The empire had fallen under the direct control of lending states. It had become an economic colony. The Ottoman example teaches us this. Sovereign debt is not just an economic issue. Debt destroys political independence. Creditors begin to interfere in the country's internal affairs to secure their receivables. Today, reforms imposed by the IMF on certain countries are essentially a modern public debt administration. As of 2025, global debt has exceeded $300 trillion. This amount is roughly double the total goods and services produced by the global economy. The world is living by mortgaging the future. Governments, corporations, individuals. Debt is no longer just a financial tool. It is the fundamental building block of modern society. Even the world's strongest economy, the USA, is shaken every year by debt ceiling debates. In 2023, the US government faced the risk of default, just as Roman senators controlled the people through debt. Today, US domestic politics are shaped by debt. The IMF was founded to support countries in crisis, but for many, it symbolizes an endless debt cycle. From Latin America in the 80s to Argentina today, the IMF imposes structural reforms in exchange for loans. Debt shapes politics. In the last 20 years, China has lent to hundreds of countries under the Belt and Road Initiative. But when these cannot be repaid, assets are seized, like Sri Lanka, leasing the Hambantota port to China for 99 years. This is debt trap diplomacy. Debt is power. The borrower becomes dependent. The lender gains not just money, but political dominance. From Rome to the Ottomans to today, the nature of debt has never changed. It is a tool of power. In Rome, it turned citizens into slaves. In the Middle Ages, it tied serfs to the soil. In the Ottoman Empire, it turned the state into a colony. Today, it limits the sovereignty of nations. Debt is the strongest invisible chain. It extends from the credit card statement to the state treasury. History leaves us a clear lesson. Debt is not just an economic issue, it is a political destiny. History may not repeat itself, but it rhymes. And the rhyme of debt has been the same for centuries: dependency, inequality, and the loss of power.